Okay, so picture this. You turn on the TV, and there's a surprise presidential address. But it's not from the White House, it's from Mar-a-Lago. And that's what we're digging into today. A speech that announced this really shocking military operation right in our hemisphere. The speaker, well, they didn't waste any time setting the stakes. Right out of the gate, this speech hits the audience with these four words. It's so simple, right? So blunt. Not this is important, but this is big stuff. It's a way to just cut through all the usual political talk and signal that what's about to be announced is a really, really big deal. And then the bombshell. The speech reveals that U.S. armed forces had captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. And let's be really clear here. This wasn't some diplomatic move or a new sanction. No. The speech described an actual military operation. We're talking boots on the ground, a physical capture of a sitting head of state. So how do you even begin to frame an operation like that to the public? Well, the speech gave it this powerful, almost movie-like name, Operation Midnight Hammer. It wasn't just a report, it was a story. So let's break down the story that they were telling. The speech really painted a picture of just raw power. It wasn't talked about as a quiet surgical strike. Oh no. It was a spectacular assault. And that key phrase, overwhelming American military power, tells you everything you need to know. The goal wasn't just to succeed. It was to show off a level of force so massive that it couldn't possibly fail. And the speech didn't just claim success. It claimed absolute perfection. This quote frames the whole thing as this uniquely American achievement, something that no other country could even dream of trying. It's this powerful bit of rhetoric that positions the action not just as effective, but as a display of unparalleled, exceptional power. And to back up that claim of perfection, the speaker gave the audience a couple of really stark, powerful numbers. First one, 0. 0 American lives lost. And this was held up as, the ultimate measure of a flawless mission. And right after that, they hit you with the second number, another 0. 0 pieces of American equipment lost. So this story being built here is crystal clear. This was an operation with overwhelming force, but executed so perfectly that it cost the United States absolutely nothing in blood or treasure. Of course, an action this dramatic, it needs a justification, right? So the speech immediately pivoted to build the case against Maduro, laying him out not just as a political opponent, but as a direct, active, and immediate danger to the United States. So this case was basically built on 3 pillars. First, narco-terrorism. The claim was that Maduro was running a cartel and flooding the U.S. with drugs. Second, gang export. The argument here was that he was deliberately sending violent gangs like Tren de Aragua, which the speech connected to the murder of an American woman, Jocelyn Noonery, to terrorize communities. And third, asset theft, framing the takeover of American oil facilities as the largest theft of American property in history. And the language used to make this case, wow. It was intentionally stark, almost dehumanizing. This quote is a perfect example. It paints this picture of a calculated, evil campaign. Not about immigration, but about an invasion of monsters sent here specifically to hurt Americans. Okay, so Maduro's captured, the justification has been laid out. What happens next? Well, the speech turned to the future and presented a very clear 3-part plan for Venezuela, a plan that would be under direct U.S. control. And they repeated this plan, for emphasis. It was all about the sequence. Step 1, the U.S. would, and these were the speaker's words, run the country. Step 2, American oil companies would come in to rebuild the country's infrastructure. And only then, as the very last step, would a safe, proper, and judicious transition of power even be looked at. And how did they frame this direct intervention? Well, as a partnership for prosperity. The speech basically promised the Venezuelan people that having the U.S. in charge would be the very thing that makes their nation rich, independent, and safe, that this would fundamentally turn their fortunes around. So for the last part of the speech, they really zoomed out. They expanded the scope way beyond just Venezuela. They used this one operation as a launching pad to declare a much broader, much more assertive foreign policy for the entire Western Hemisphere. The speech drew this really sharp line in the sand between the past and the present. It accused earlier administrations of neglecting the region, of letting threats grow, and the new approach, a full-throated reassertion of American power in what the address called our home region. This wasn't just a minor policy change. It was framed as a complete overhaul of past failures. And this is it. This is the core idea of that new doctrine, and it's stated in the most unambiguous terms you can possibly imagine. Just look at the words dominance and never be questioned again. That's not the language of partnership or influence. It's a declaration that American authority in its own hemisphere is absolute and is no longer up for discussion.
And then, the speech basically weaponized the operation itself, turning it into a direct threat to the rest of the region. It explicitly warned other leaders that Maduro's fate could be their own. It transformed this one event into both a precedent and, honestly, a pretty chilling warning. So, the speech laid out the whole package: a successful operation, a clear justification, and the new foreign policy doctrine that it represents. But it leaves us with a really critical question. After the address is over and the cameras are off, what does American dominance actually look like in practice for the millions of people living across the hemisphere? That's the question that this speech leaves hanging in the air.